Hello, welcome to the Naftiko Capabilities podcast. My name is Ken Lane. I'm the Chief Community Officer for Naftiko, but you might also know me as the API Evangelist, where I've been talking about the technology, business, and politics of APIs since 2010. This is my podcast where we talk about APIs, integrations, and applications, but I'm always working to steer things towards business outcomes. Today, I sat down with Kevin Swiber, who I've worked with over the years for the last, I would say, 15 years on APIs, and we work together at Postman. But Kevin's doing a lot of work on the MCP skills and the AI integration front. And Kevin came in to our Thursday live webinar to have a conversation about MCP and agent skills. And when I sat down with Kevin, I just straight up asked him, why are agent skills going to kill MCP?
But I love any claim that like technology X is going to kill Y, right? As if like we still don't have COBOL running on mainframes today. Like nothing dies, right? Like nothing ever dies. Um, well, I talked to lots of folks who are doing MCP now, probably because that's what I like post about a whole bunch, and so they reach out to me. Uh, and it's so confusing out there if you're trying to like run agents and trying to stay on top of all this technology. Uh, it to formulate like a plan of okay, now what am I actually supposed to do is really really difficult. And so there's a bunch of confusion. We've got MCP out there, and just like every API technology that came out, it was going to kill something else, right? So GraphQL was going to kill REST, right? And so MCP comes out, and they're like, oh, MCP is going to kill all APIs. And now we have MCP apps coming out, and they're like, MCP apps are going to kill all web UIs. Like, this is so ridiculous, right? Can we just enjoy something for a minute? Like, can we just, instead of having like, this catastrophe coming, can we just like enjoy what's happening here and evolve normally? Um, so like it leads to such a crowded landscape here because we're trying to like figure this out as we go. Like the technology is almost moving faster than we can acknowledge and learn, right? So I always say like we're way too early in this to claim best practices. Um, However, people always ask like, what are the best practices around this? Because they don't want to like make a mistake early on that they're going to be paying for, in a negative way over the next 10 years. So agent skills comes up, right? Claude Claude, I think it was Claude Code initially start release this thing called skills, and people are like, okay, great, like another sort of primitive I have to learn in this. And it kind of like it got more and more popular, and now it's like a whole spec. I think it's mostly Block and Anthropic kind of working on the agent skills spec. But essentially, what it boils down to is that like MCP is really great, or at least MCP tools are really great at describing like giving you like a set of things you can do, right? And agent skills help you to understand how to do those things, right? So I think the example that Anthropic gives is like walking through a hardware store. Your MCP server is the aisles that you walking down. Maybe you go down the plumbing aisle, and the agent skill is the employee who works there telling you what you actually need to buy and what you actually need to do to fix your leak at home, right? So understanding how to fix a problem or how to do a certain procedure or workflow is much different than having the tools to do it. And so agent skills tells you how, and the MCP tools give you what.
I like that a lot. It kind of distills things down into simple layers that we can understand. And this is the part of AI integration that I like is the differences in the semantics and how we talk about these layers. But I don't think everybody has a handle on this layer and what the differences are. And I wanted to ask Kevin, does he think that people are struggling when it comes to understanding APIs and AI integration amidst all of this hype?
Yeah, I mean, it really can be, lots of, I mean, I just last month, I interviewed probably about 30 different people at different enterprises. And I was surprised to learn that, while a lot of them are using AI today, they're mostly using it as like a Stack Overflow replacement. So they're like, going to ChatGPT, they're pasting in some code fragment, they're asking a question, ChatGPT is answering it, giving a code fragment back, they're pasting that into their IDE, right? And that ended up being a lot more people than I anticipated, especially because like we've got all of these like revenue numbers that are coming in, like Claude Code gets $1 billion in revenue, right? And so I'm kind of like, where's that coming from? I think, well, first of all, these are self-reported numbers. I mean, I'm not saying they're lying, but they're self-reported. So, take that as you will. But I think like the reality is that most people are not way down in this rabbit hole of AI changing their lives, right? And we've got to realize that we got to meet people where they are, and doing this sort of like sensationalism around going all in on one technology is actually kind of dangerous for these folks, because if they actually believe that and they buy into it, then they're like turning their whole career towards this, and potentially boxing themselves out of a job, right? Like I think it is actually very important that we are responsible in how we talk about these things, because I think they actually do have real impact in the world.
Agree 100%. I think it's very, very important that we talk about this in ways that make sense and kind of cuts through the noise and grounds in both what's possible engineering wise, but also business wise. And I think that's one of the reasons I always enjoy talking to Kevin. But when it comes to MCP, I'm involved in a lot of conversations right now when it comes to context engineering, so model context protocol. But most of those conversations are right kind of at runtime, at that interface layer with MCP, and trying to engineer that right context right there in that moment, where I'm looking at it more from a strategic perspective, organizationally, what tools, what do you put in, and how do you kind of craft this context window ahead of time so that your MCPs are successful as possible. So that's what I wanted to ask Kevin, is how is he seeing people engineer this context window so that they get the results that they're looking for?
Yeah, so it's pretty difficult right now. One thing everybody supports with MCP is tools, right? So I can access my Salesforce account, or I can access my Notion account, my Linear account, my GitHub account, whatever it is, pull in context, or take some kind of action. But MCP actually has a lot more than just tools out there, right? And kind of like one of the other primitives they have is resources. And so these can have like a URI associated with them. You can reference them from like tool output. It's kind of cool. But they're mostly used for like people to say, oh, I want to include the context of this resource, right? But an example that I give is that I built this MCP server for talking to debuggers. If I want to include the context of like a debug console in the conversation, I could like @tag that particular resource and sort of bring it into the conversation that I'm having. The big problem with something like this, though, well, really anything that's not tools in MCP, is that the support for it is scattered completely throughout all the different tools out there. So, like your Claude desktop will like list MCP resources you have, but it won't really use them, I think. I think Cursor kind of does the same. Maybe you can @tag them now in Cursor. But it's kind of like, the forgotten primitive, like, the puppy no one wanted to adopt, like it's kind of sad out there. But I think there's huge potential in what it could provide. I think where we got into this kind of conversation of like, oh, skills are killing MCP, is because we're identifying patterns really that are important that we want to bring in. It's not that MCP can't do it, it's just that they haven't done it yet. And so with agent skills, one of those patterns was progressive disclosure, where, you could have a whole bunch of skills and you can have like metadata about those skills, and that stuff will get put into your context. And then when the LLM says, oh, hey, I want to dig deeper on this, then it'll go read sort of the entire skill file. Your agent will, your client will read the entire skill file, and then bring that in. And then so you've got more context in this without dumping all the context in there at once, right? Now, where people are having lots of trouble with MCP, this has been discussed a lot in the MCP protocol groups and the various working groups, is that many MCP hosts out there, so like your Cloud Desktop, your Open Code Agent, whatever it might be, they take the response coming back from like a tools list call to your server, and they dump the entire tools list into the context, right? And so you end up pretty quickly with this scenario where you've got 35 tools and 23,000 tokens being used, and none of them are actually providing you value, right? So it's really like a complex thing. And so what folks started doing was like semantic search on the host side to kind of limit what they send the LLM in the first place. And recently, Anthropic released a whole sort of like API side thing to do this called a tool search tool, but they've integrated that into Claude and into Claude Code as well. So now if like your MCP servers are going to take up more than 10% of your context, it'll do like a search across them to only give the LLM a subset of those tools. So like the progressive disclosure is happening in a couple of different ways. Agent Skills just kind of got it right first.
I think the specs matter, and skills getting it right first over MCP, I think, is true. But I also just think the words we use to describe it, I think the word skills over MCP is actually pretty compelling and paints a different picture as far as what you're gonna get, what you're actually be doing with this skill, and it's a much more tangible thing. But I'm still curious who within an enterprise organization is actually going to be in charge of creating these skills and curating them and managing them over time. So I asked Kevin who he sees doing this work.
Yeah, well, I think the cool thing about skills as opposed to like MCP is that it's kind of like democratized out to the individual, right? Like really anyone in your marketing department can start crafting a skill based on their own workflow to try to automate their workflow. In my experience, as you start doing this, you start seeing like commonalities and patterns, and then suddenly like you're having a conversation with everyone and how they're automating their workflow. And if you want to start sharing that around, like you're basically just sharing a text file around, right? Like you're not really sharing code for the most part. You can, but if you're in marketing, you're probably not. Maybe you're using MCP servers. I think GTM functions are probably one of the earlier business sides departments to start adopting this kind of technology. But the cool thing about skills is that you can build them on your own, no matter who you are. You don't necessarily have to be a software developer. You don't have to use like software developer AI code gen stuff. You can just type a bunch of text and see immediate benefits.
I like that, and honestly, that's why I'm rooting for skills over MCP, because I just think it's a much it's something that makes sense to someone who's just a business stakeholder, a business user. It's something that you can actually understand and read and put to use. It's very simple. Where I saw MCP as just another technical implementation for engineers, but I think it's going to be critical how people are able to access and apply and see these skills, discover them, and actually put them to use. And so I was curious what Kevin's seeing when it comes to MCP, but also A2A when it comes to the business side of things. Are people registering MCP with Office 365 Copilot? What's happening on the business side of things? How are people putting it to work via GPT layers and other things?
Yeah, I mean, the skills go beyond MCP. I think, they're probably best. A lot of this technology is probably best when there is a human user involved in this. And you're looking for some kind of like dynamic extension that user can self-select. When we talk about, and I get a lot of questions about this too, like, is MCP really relevant if I'm building like these headless agents in the background? And I say for the most part, and I think maybe Isabel's kind of hinting at this, I say for the most part, no. You don't really need MCP for that. Because at that point, like you control all the code, you control like what tools are getting wired up. Those tools coming back from the LLM can execute your custom code. And so if there's already an interface going to some system that you want to work with, using that interface probably makes a lot more sense than wrapping it in an MCP server. Where MCP does start to make sense is in this ecosystem where human beings are going out and self-selecting and they're saying, oh, well, you know what? I have a Notion server, or I have a Notion account, I have a Linear account, I have a GitHub account, and I kind of want to integrate that context into, questions that I have, or, actions that I want to take. But like when you know all that stuff up front, when you know like all the possible actions that this agent is ever going to take, when you know all the possible context this agent is ever going to need, MCP is certainly overkill, and I would say you don't need it at all.
I like that. I think we need to get a lot better at having these conversations about when a certain protocol or pattern is applicable or not, rather than just coming in with a new one and saying this one's going to replace everything that came before it. So I like Kevin's nuanced approach, and appreciate them coming by and always sharing. And I'll definitely keep checking in with Kevin on this, because with kind of the rapid cycles of what's going on, there's always something new to talk about. So I'll check in with Kevin pretty regularly to see what's going on. But thanks for showing up. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you at the next one. Oh wait, one more thing before I go. This session with Kevin was recorded during our live webinar conversations that I hold every Tuesday and Thursday. So I have one 10 a.m. Eastern time to catch the Eastern US seaboard and Europe. But then on Thursday, I have 1 p.m., and that's where I sat down with Kevin. So they're turning out to be pretty interesting. So far, I've managed to get 3 different guests for the 3 that I've done, and usually have about 5 to 10, 12 people there in the chat asking questions and tuning in, which I hope will grow, and with interesting people and interesting conversations. But then I'm taking those and slicing them into these podcasts. And this one was just with Kevin, because there was a lot of good conversation. But others you'll see mixed into other conversations going on future episodes. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Feel free to come by the webinar on Tuesdays or Thursdays, or you can just keep subscribing here to this podcast via YouTube, via Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. Feel free to reach out. Easy to find on LinkedIn, Kin Lane, and I'm on Blue Sky as well. And you can see us at nftiko.io. Appreciate you tuning in. See you next time.